Where we stand right now, it's honestly, it's pretty unclear. I know as much as what you know, listening to President Trump right now. The positive thing that I saw was we weren't on that list. We weren't on page 1, we weren't on page 2, we weren't on page 3, and ourselves and Mexico. So we're going to stay tuned. Let's hope that there's some positive news coming.
Doug Ford reacting just a little while ago to Donald Trump's announcement on tariffs this afternoon, just after 4 o'clock. And yes, he's right. We are nowhere to be found on that list of, I believe it's 50 countries. I'm looking at the list here who are going to be facing tariffs now based on the tariffs that the U.S. says they are charging them, roughly half. So, for example, take China. China apparently is charging the U.S. 67% tariffs. The U.S.'s retaliatory reciprocal tariff, will be 34%. It's roughly half for every country on the list, and there are 50 countries, at least that I'm looking at here. Some of the ones that are most affected with the highest tariffs happen to be in Southeast Asia. Among them, I'm looking here, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Madagascar, Myanmar, Laos. So they're looking at tariffs in some cases of more than 45%. Tom Mulcair is on the line. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time here. You heard what we heard outside of the hyperbole that started this thing from the president. There wasn't a whole lot of substance here beyond the countries I just mentioned. He made a big point of that. Canada and Mexico, notably, are nowhere on this list. They're nowhere anywhere. What do you make of this?
Well, and I was on CTV, so I got a chance to follow a full hour of Donald Trump. I'm still recovering from that. And I was listening to Doug Ford, and he was making lots of sense, saying, as you just said, a clip there, we're not in there. But it's amazing that the premier, and by the way, Ford's done an amazing job. I think that's worth underscoring again. He doesn't have the slightest idea what it means for the most important industry in our largest province, because he doesn't know. And he doesn't know simply because this is all about generalities. This is all about the bluster. This is all about Trump putting on a show. But of course, tariffs and duties and legal documents are all about details. So we're going to have to wait to see the details. But there is, I think, a reasonable interpretation that could be made that Trump has started talking about renegotiating Canada, U.S., Mexico. How can he talk about renegotiating that deal if he doesn't even respect the one that's there? So if it does come to pass that the Americans say, no, we'll consider it an American vehicle if more than 50% of the parts come from the United States or are manufactured there, I think that that's something the auto companies will be able to deal with. All along, those companies have been putting up numbers that showed that it would cost $15,000, $17,000 U.S. more to build a pickup truck and to get it into people's hands. That would stoke inflation. Trump might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he's not a complete idiot, and he's got some very smart people around him. So Trump was putting on a show, talking about tariffs, but at the same time, he's lumping in something it's a VAT, it's the value-added tax. He kept calling it a VAT, and what he was referring to is that a lot of companies have sales taxes like we do. I mean, the federal sales tax, the GST, is built into the product. You don't see it as an add-on depending on the province. It's usually, it can be included. And what they do in Europe is the VAT is always included. And so he's saying that's a hidden tariff. It's a hidden cost. And I'm going to start including that. So when he says he's only going to be charging half, he says he's charging half of the tariffs plus everything else that he's already larded on. So it's a bit of a trick that he's playing there.
I'm looking here. We have the White House briefing sheet here. One of the issues that was discussed that we sort of maybe overlooked right at the beginning is beyond all these different tariff levels for different countries, there's a 10% baseline tariff being applied. But then we found out, and it's being reported by multiple sources now, that 10% baseline will not apply to Canada. So we dodged a bullet in that perspective, right?
For the same reason. He can't say that he's going to renegotiate the Canada, U.S., Mexico trade deal. Remember how that came about. When he came into office in his first term, he said that the worst trade deal in the history of the United States was the North American Free Trade Agreement. He said he was going to scrap it. He scrapped it. He signed a new one. He didn't just negotiate it. He had the signing ceremony, Donald J. Trump with that big pen and all the bluster that comes with anything that Donald Trump does. So how can he possibly turn around to his closest trading partners in Canada and Mexico and say, and by the way, I'd like to renegotiate it? His word is meaningless. We've already known that for a long time, but now we've seen it in action. His word is meaningless. So the smarter people around him, the Howard Lutnicks of this world, are saying, oh, boss, you're such a genius. This is absolutely amazing what you've just done. But now we better start getting down to cases and deciding how we're going to do this. So a lot of this stuff is based on the premise that, as Trump understands it, this is money that's just going to flow into the U.S. Treasury. But all this gets added onto the cost of goods that American consumers buy. And by the way, you were right. The $200 billion subsidy that he gives so generously to Canada was mentioned again. That's the $200 billion trade surplus between Canada and the U.S. that is entirely comprised of oil and gas that we sell them cheap because we've never built the infrastructure to get it off out of our country, especially off to the Atlantic coast. And they're the ones who are benefiting from us selling them oil cheaper than anybody else in the world. But he calls that a subsidy to Canada. That's Trump's world. He takes factoids, he knits them together in his own way, and he comes up with his own reality. I do think that once we do get a chance to see the legal documents, we will find out that we're into a negotiation phase, something, by the way, that Legault has said since day one. Some people criticized him on that. He said, no, we've got to sit down and we've got to start renegotiating it. That's the base. And I think that might be everybody's exit ramp in this thing.
I will just sort of point out that the steel and aluminum tariffs already in place, nothing changes there, right? They remain where they are.
But they are not having great effect. There's not a single job that's been lost, even though we manufacture all the aluminum that goes into the States. We haven't stopped shipping the stuff, and we haven't lost any jobs. It's just that the products that it's going into are going to increase in price in the United States. And this is the tricky thing. He keeps talking about this. He's going to tariff them. Someone says that he's going to tax them. It's these other countries that are paying the taxes. It's American consumers who are paying the taxes. But it's going to take a while for that to sink in when they start getting their numbers on inflation, when they start to see ticking up and the economy not doing as well. Trump will, of course, have an explanation and say it's everybody else's fault, but it'll be his fault.
So if we can take this to mean Canada dodged a bullet, perhaps, to say we're not going to get what we thought we might get, certainly not worst case scenario, how do we look at this politically? Is this a win for Mark Carney?
That's the key question. I think that Mark, and I'm saying that with a smile because, of course, that's what Trump referred to Prime Minister Carney calling him Mark on Friday, said he had a great conversation and blah, blah, blah. So Friday, they have this conversation. Trump completely changes his tune, and we seem to, as you say, dodge the bullet today. If that's the case, there'll still be lots of drama between now and the end of the campaign. There's a lot of this that has to be fleshed out. But I do think that it would be golden for the Liberals, no question about that.
I will ask one other thing. With respect to what we're seeing here now, there's also the story, and I'm sure you've heard of this, Tom, tonight on the floor of the Senate, I guess, in the U.S.,
yes.
They needed 4 Republican senators to go along with this move to basically say this whole sham of a fentanyl crisis being used to declare a national emergency and then using that to go ahead and say, well, based on that, we need to come up with these tariffs. First of all, the chances of that actually passing, I don't know what they are. Apparently, they have the 4 Republicans they need. Does that change anything, do you think, long term?
Well, the only way for Donald Trump and Howard Lutnick to argue that they haven't broken the Canada-U.S.-Mexico deal is to say that they were using the clause in American and in those agreements that says that if there's an emergency, it's standard procedure. If you have something that's an act of God or a security emergency, something outside of anybody's control. But we all know that it's complete and utter BS with regard to fentanyl in Canada. It's just the same type of excuse that he came up with last time. He said it was a national security issue when he started tariffing Canadian aluminum and steel during his first mandate. So all he needs to know, he's a guy who spent his life in front of the courts and with lawyers up the wazoo, and all he needs to be told is there's a clause that says if you declare a national emergency, then you can get around the deal. And then he says, well, invoke the clause, and then we'll work on the details later. One of the details is the vote tonight. I don't see too many people standing in the way of Trump, although there is some indication that a couple of the senators might be saying, okay, enough's enough.
All right, we shall see. I will point out one thing, markets, and I was just following the Standard & Poor's because it trades after the close at 4 o'clock.
Right.
It's down over 2.5%, so markets are not happy with what they heard. It's actually almost down 3%. It's at its lowest level now in about a year, not just since this year, but in about a year.
Yeah, and these are trillions of dollars that get flushed down the drain every time this happens. So, that's everybody's pension plan. That's everybody's savings. It's the economy. It's the banking system. And it's Donald Trump, giving lessons in the Rose Garden on things he doesn't even understand. So it really was something to behold, that whole press conference. It really was.
That's a good way to describe it. Tom, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care.